Susanne, thank you so much for joining us here at RiskMinds. Now, one of the questions being asked this week is FinTech, friend or foe? What would you say to that?
Now, what we see 2-3 years ago, then it would be a distance that the banks were kind of shying away of the fintechs. What we see now, it's a lot of collaboration. And we write some reports where we ask banks and fintechs and do surveys, and 84% of the banks say they would like to collaborate with the fintechs.
So you think they really are changing the business model to adopt this now?
Yeah, I think so. Of course, the banks and the fully wholesale banks with all the fintechs and come in and bite some of the value chain because everyone wants to take away the middleman or the middlemen and reduce the cost quite a lot to it. But the banks are doing quite a lot to absorb these things. They're sitting on the customers, they're sitting on the money, unfortunately legacy system, and here's where the fintechs are coming in with their tech-savvy systems, state-of-the-art. They are having agile culture. These two things, the bank's assets and the fintech's assets together, is a winning team.
So, bearing in mind that approach from the banks, would you say that banks are on the whole adopting a collaborative approach with fintechs, or are they trying to start bringing this in-house and having structures themselves that develop fintech ideas within their own businesses?
There are both to it, but what we've seen over time is that banks are usually slow. It's a culture, risk-averse, a lot of legacy systems, so that takes a long time to change. And we see that the banks, they rather take a shorter version, which is to collaborate with fintechs. So it's all about the trust between the banks and the fintechs to work, because you want to, or you like to be close to them and make sure that it's a win-win situation for both parties.
And where the best expertise is, I guess, as well.
Exactly. Absolutely. So fintechs, they are usually very tech savvy. That's where they started, and building up, and less costly because they're using the newest technology. Their challenge again is to scale and have the trust out in the market, and regulation in particular this year, where the EU in particular has launched quite a lot of regulation with the Payment Service Directive 2, MiFID for the investment side, AML4 is coming, Solvency 2 for the insurance side. So it's a lot coming. If we take the PSD2, the incentive from the EU was to incentivize innovation and then reduce cost for the end user, whether that's consumer or the businesses.
So looking at what the role the regulators will play, do you think they are going to be sort of encouraging the innovation or adopting an approach which is more protective to that end user, as you described there? What is their role?
Their role is being challenged with the new business models coming up, in particular from the fintech side. But if you see PSD2 on the one side, which is very tilted toward the innovation side, and then GDPR protecting and holding that, those two are polarizing on each side. So you have to make both sides work on to have this play out in the market.
If the more institutional banks are to fully adopt fintech, one of the concerns that they have, and indeed a topic that's on the agenda fully here this week, is sort of cybersecurity and issues of security around data and fintech. What would your thoughts be on that?
Of course, with all the tech savviness and the fintechs, a lot of the data, hacking and cybersecurity and all these things. But the evolution is towards utilizing the technology more and more, so then you need to cover up for that with on the onboarding, AML, also anti-money laundering, and know your customers, and particularly on the know your customers. So those you onboard as customers, they are gone through the fully digital onboarding. And the Nordic in particular, and also the Holland or Netherlands, they are using IDs, electronic IDs or bank IDs or whatever it's called in the various countries. This is a very good way to onboard into the banks for the first time, so you don't need to show up in the branch and so forth.
So the banks and the fintechs always need to be one step ahead of the bad guys, if you like.
Absolutely, that is always the case. And back to the regulations, how for them to keep up with the new things, they also need to have the talents and the resources that can understand and keep up with the regulation in this space.
So with all of that in mind, where are the greatest opportunities going forward into 2019 for FinTech?
Good question. Back to the survey that we did. So then we ask the banks and the FinTechs what you think is going to be in the future. This year has been a lot on the open banking, so opening up and APIs and so forth. So banks are heavy into doing that, and also the fintechs, they have been ready for a long time on that. But now we see data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and there's a source about data that you can monetize quite a lot. Of course, you have to educate the market that this is beneficial to buy and so forth. But here, I think there's a gold mine for banks and fintechs.
It's an industry that's evolving so quickly, really, isn't it, compared to what's gone on in the past?
Absolutely. But the financial service industry is quite digital in the first place.
Thank you so much for joining us. Great to hear your insights, Susanne. Thank you.
Thank you very much.